All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. A quick update on how we go about this. Each of us kind of brings different points of view to these topics based on our skills and our affinities and the things that we love and the things that we hate, although we're relatively united in the things that we hate. Today, we're going to kind of look at the recent Microsoft Ignite conference through that lens. And the mission we took away from our planning was everybody bring one big idea, like one big takeaway that you got from Ignite this year, and let's talk about it. So that was the premise for this. That translates roughly to this agenda. And Todd, were you the last one in, so you put yourself first? That's very slick.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Whoever touches the deck last gets to, whatever. So I felt that was my obligation. Sweet. Alphabetically, it was first, then it just made more sense.
All right, let's jump right in, Todd. Since you're
you're serious about that? Holy cow! Okay, yeah. So we were talking before we started the recording, and before Mike couldn't figure out how to share a screen, we were talking about the cadence of things and how releases are. And so some of this is like the first one, the subscription edition. I don't think that came out at Ignite. They announced the first preview like in July or August, something like that. But it did get GA'd around the same time, so I'm putting it in because I'm excited about it. And that is a new version of on-prem SharePoint Server, probably the last version. And I say that because it's really like a new version of the previous version. So for instance, throughout eternity, back when the dinosaurs were using SharePoint, you could only ever migrate SharePoint from the previous version. They called it N-1. With this one, with subscription edition, you can migrate from N-2. So it's like it's SharePoint 2019, but with a new glossy coat of paint. But they're doing things like it's now licensed. That's why it's called subscription edition. They're going to have some information about that. It's more tightly tied to the cloud. So for those of you who still want on-prem SharePoint, that's out there. And I think they're just going to keep iterating on that, I think. Another admin thing that they announced was the SharePoint migration tool that Microsoft gives for free is going to have some amount of support for migrating workflows from on-prem to the cloud. I didn't get a lot of details on what that meant, if it's 2010 workflows, 2013 workflows, which specific actions, what that's going to look like. But that will show up in the SharePoint migration tool that you get for free when we go to office.com and all that. So I haven't had a chance to kick the tires on that much, but that's also there. A couple of new things that came out during the week were now private channels are going to show up in the SharePoint Admin Center. So now when you go and look at your active sites, imagine there is a very impressive column there that is not activated on my tenant yet that shows you the private channels each site has. When private channels came out, one of the things that Microsoft really struggled with was how to keep them private but make them discoverable at the same time. And they've really struggled a lot and failed on that a bunch. But now that's going to show up in Central Admin. And Mike hit the button. There we go. And there's a new report on how links are being shared inside of Microsoft. So that's one of the problems when we see people move into the cloud. We're like, oh, it's so easy to share stuff, and the admins, everything starts to pucker, and they're worried about things being overshared. And so there's this new report now. It doesn't work in my tenant, much like the other column doesn't. So imagine that that's there, and then when you bring that report up, it shows you which sites are sharing things with everyone links and externally and all that. So it'll be curious once that starts rolling out if that scratches that itch on discoverability for sharing.
I do see the channel sites column in the SharePoint Admin Center in our Simpraxis tenant.
So I might not have any private channels in my tenant, so it might.
I see the column, but there's nothing in it because we don't have any either. But it's there, and we're targeted release. So
okay,
maybe that's it.
So do what Mark did. Don't do what I do.
Oh yeah, of course.
So that's it for me.
Goes without saying.
Sage advice.
So I'll be talking about all of the different integration updates into Microsoft Teams, not the Microsoft Teams itself updates. And this is one of my favorite slides that was presented in Dan Holmes' session in Ignite because it just shows all the different components starting at the bottom. We have SharePoint News and Yammer Conversations, which feeds into our Viva Connections web part, which is then accessible in Microsoft Teams. So we're really getting access to these 2 different applications in one location in Teams, really bringing your intranet so you don't have to be leaving Microsoft Teams at all. So one of my favorite updates that is coming on the next slide, Mike, is the SharePoint Teams update. Right now, you can edit pages in Microsoft Teams, but you can't create them. So they did announce you're going to be able to create content for Microsoft Teams. That's going to be really great for our site owners. You don't have to go to a web browser to create content anymore. And that's coming in January 2022. And then there's quite a few updates that are happening with OneDrive and Teams. So OneDrive specifically, we all know they have that add to OneDrive link in SharePoint libraries. Pretty soon, you're going to be able to add that into private folders. So they won't just be top tier. You can actually nest them and organize them the way you'd like. They're also going to be adding that add to OneDrive in the Teams channels files. So you'll be able to add those SharePoint document libraries to OneDrive from Teams. In OneDrive, they're going to be adding in that share dialog menu. Right now, you can share to Outlook, you can copy links, but they're going to be adding share to Teams. And then last but not least, all of your meeting recordings in Teams go to OneDrive. By end of this year, they're going to have the video recordings embedded with transcripts and comments. And then later next year, they're going to have table of contents based on any of the slides you presented with PowerPoint Live. That's going to be incredibly powerful.
So I have a question about some of this, and this is completely off topic, but I was on a call with a customer a couple of days ago, and they were in a French-speaking country, and at one point, 2 of them started saying what I can only assume were mean things about me in French, and I so I thought the translation bit was showing up in there somewhere, but I couldn't find a way to decipher what terrible things they were saying. Am I imagining the translation part being in there?
That's a good question. I'll have to look that one up.
Okay. All right. They got away with it this time, but next time.
You're just going to learn French really fast. So
I'm gonna. It's my only other option unless Emily comes through for me.
No,
Yeah,
at
least just-
learn French.
Just the bad words and you'll be set.
That's probably true.
So then for our next update, talking about starting your workday and getting your work done from Teams, the create option is going to be added into Microsoft Teams as well. This is something you might be familiar with office.com, where you can log in and see all those recent documents and then create from anything. So again, whether it is a SharePoint page, whether it's a OneNote notebook or an Excel spreadsheet, you're going to really be able to start this all right from Microsoft Teams. Last but not least, we have Yammer. So the Communities app is now available in Teams, so you don't have to go again to a web browser to a separate area to go to your outer loop conversations. You get those Teams inner loop conversations with your Yammer outer loop conversations all in one place. And this is also all integrated into Viva connections. So if you're using that top left link where you can see our Simpraxis icon, you'd be able to see those Yammer conversations there as well. The update that's coming, which I'm really excited about, is there's topics in Yammer right now, and then there's Viva topics. So this is going to be the same in the future. So once you have a premium Viva topics experience, you'll be able to see things like topic cards, which we can see on the right, related to the topics in Yammer. And they promised that when you have Yammer questions and answers and you tag it with a topic, that the AI will actually route it to the experts to be able to answer those questions, which I think will be phenomenal for people having those crowdsourced questions in a really public place, but then making sure that it's on your intranet as well.
And Emily, I don't know that I can describe it accurately, but I know that there are challenges for people with a lot of Yammer content who have used hashtags in Yammer historically, kind of transitioning into Teams. We've had this conversation at a client, and it's a mess. The transition is going to be really difficult for that reason. So just a heads up, if you've got a rich, vibrant existing set of Yammer communities with a lot of hashtagged topics, the path is a little fuzzy there to get to Viva topics from there.
And that's everything for me. On to more Viva with Mike.
All right, let's talk topics a little bit more. I think this is a little narrower than most of what we've talked about, in that fewer people will care about it, but those who care will care more deeply, I suspect. Topics right now show up in SharePoint, right? Anytime if I have Viva topics and something is identified as a Viva topic and published, I see that topic card that Emily showed us on the last screen, this guy on the right. what they announced at Ignite were the new user experiences. Yammer in preview by year end, what Emily showed on her screen. Outlook Web Access also in preview by year end, and Teams available by the end of the first quarter of next year. So now those topic cards get a lot more interesting because they'll work in all of the work surfaces or most of the primary work surfaces I'm using. I don't have to go into SharePoint to see them. That content meets me in context of where I'm working. Teams, Outlook, Yammer, SharePoint. Users are going to be able to opt in. So right now, if I curate a topic and I identify Todd as an expert in PowerShell, Todd has no administrative console for seeing that, except for the start page of the topic center, which he may or may not ever go to. And he also would have to manually go in to the topic and edit the topic to take himself out and say, I'm not the expert that you think I am in PowerShell. So there's going to be additional capabilities for user opt-in and opt-out of topics, as well as features for grouping topics together or certain types and segments of topics. So if I have a set of topics that all relate to governance, I can tie them to the term governance and then have people's search for governance bring up a whole set of related topics. In the Viva Topics work we've done so far, the pilot I'm working on, we've definitely found the analytics lacking in Microsoft's focus on improving them and the topic center to give us, more rapid publishing. Right now, there's a lot of lag in publishing that creates problems, and just the ability to see, show me all the sites where I'm identified as an expert in this topic, or where an expert hasn't been identified, that are orphaned, those types of things we expect to see. To the language thing that Todd talked about, they're introducing in Q4 the French, German, and Spanish content crawls. So if you're working in a multilingual environment, if anybody's on from Canada, they have to support English and French. You'll see content crawls that cover that. And they've got a couple of adoption tools that they put out there at Ignite. The use case catalog, which is published, and I think there's a link to in the resource that we linked at the end, and a hackathon. So one of the early scenarios for Viva Topics is that it's set up like Wikipedia. It's not a centralized governance model, but how do we get people engaged? How do we get people to curate topics, et cetera? And this hackathon has a kind of a jumpstart mentality about getting that started. So that's what's new on topics. Happy to field other questions in the chat or offline later, and I'll flip it over to, I think it's back to you, Emily, for other Viva updates.
Nope, this is me.
Sorry, Derek, it's the DCP.
Yep. So, Mike covered topics. What they also announced is that all 4 components of the Viva suite are now live and in GA. And so that includes topics, insights, learning, and connections. If you haven't seen, so obviously topics is sort of that knowledge base. Insights is really that health and well-being piece. And then you've got learning, which is your micro learning capabilities. That's really that sort of, how do I use Outlook? How do I use Teams? There is some crossover there with Microsoft Learning Pathways. If you have listened to any of us talk, we're huge proponents of learning pathways. One is not going away in place of the other, so that's really great. And if you want more on that, I think we're presenting at the platform call in a couple weeks. But then there's also Viva Connections, which is the what you're seeing here in the screenshot, as well as the information that Emily presented earlier. That's also our extension piece. That's our place for extensibility. As Julie mentioned earlier in the chat, all 4 of these are now available as a suite, as a single SKU that you can buy, so you don't have to buy them piecemeal. They're running a special, an Ignite special. It's $9 per user per month till August 2022. And then it's $12 per user per month after that. Not necessarily an Ignite thing, but very specific to Viva Connections and to extensibility. SPFX version 1.13 was released last week, or 2 weeks ago, I believe it was. And with that comes the new dashboard page layout, which if you haven't seen that, you will soon. So you can create a dashboard on your site and then include it on your home site, as well as a new dashboard web part to start including all these little widgets that you see in the screenshot that are called ACEs, or adaptive cart extensions. So this was really a great new extension point for us to be, to do things. Not only can we build web parts, but now we can build these sort of mobile first adaptive cart extensions.
We probably should mention that there's a couple of the PnP group has a couple of new sample galleries too, to sort of help get people imagining what can happen with Viva connections. So there's the SPFX solutions or something like that. Derek, you can share the links. And there's and then there's an adaptive card samples gallery. So there's a couple of things out there, and you can then download those and try them in your dev environment so that you can kind of get a feel for what these things might be like. So that's a good tip.
Yep. So the reference scenario that I just pasted there, that's a series of apps that Julie and I worked on to showcase SPFX Teams development as well as adaptive cart extensions. And then we've also got the, if I could copy and paste properly, the ACEs samples gallery. And that is right there. And that is sample adaptive cards. So they're just adaptive cart extensions, and you can see what those, what we can do there. There's a sample in there called the card gallery, which is actually a collection of ACEs based on the adaptive card gallery. So you can just sort of get a art of the possible kind of thing in there just to see what you can do.
The link that Derek, I put in between Derek's links is the whole PnP samples and solutions gallery. So there's lots of good stuff in there. If you haven't taken a look at that and you do any development at all, you're working too hard.
Yep.
Derek, one question I'm getting from a client who's doing some things with connections and written some ACEs is having a dashboard is great, but if I just want one component of that, so the thing on the right, maybe that expenses piece, maybe I want that as a web part on the travel site, right? So that it's in context. I think we don't have that today, correct? We have one dashboard that we get.
Yeah. So right now there is one dashboard, and you can only put as far as I know, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can only put that dashboard on the home site. So you're limited to one dashboard.
Page layout and the dashboard web part is a superpower, stealing the word from whomever coined that, like maybe Sue, is a superpower of a home site.
So yes, you can include it, but no, you can't include it directly on the travel site. So there's a limitation there. You can, they do have the ability to audience target them. So you can audience target your ACEs. So you could have a series, do what we did back in the old days with audience targeted web parts, and have the travel one, or the if you had a sales one for expenses, you could put that and audience target that to one group.
That's true.
Yeah, not the same thing, but close.
I like Mike Duffy's idea a lot, Derek. I'm curious what you think. I don't know that that's viable today, but I'm thinking that mobile users are going to need access to different content in different ways potentially.
Right now, the dashboard isn't mobile only, as far as I know.
Right. I think you get one dashboard. Yeah. I think you get one dashboard that works across, but it would be interesting if you could serve something specific up to mobile users who have different needs.
Yeah, it would be, and that's really what they're looking. I mean, that's what they're looking at here in the screenshot. I think this is more future state than what's currently available today.
Well, no, so the screenshot is just showing you is that it works in mobile, and that's their idea behind it. But I think to Mike's point, there's no targeting to mobile. Although you might, you you would be sort of hacking it together, but you could audience target some stuff to mobile users, right? Like say these are like the people that are on mobile, and then write the code that says, hey, don't render me if this isn't on mobile. And so they would effectively kind of hide themselves. You could probably do that, but it would be a total hack. And so you really want to see them putting something in that says only show this card when the user is on mobile.
This is Mike. Yeah, because we are just putting a link to the portal for mobile users, but that makes no sense if I ever wanted to include that web part in the portal itself. And so, the only reason that we do that is because that first tab of the Viva connections on mobile is the dashboard, and so you know you'd almost expect that to be the portal, just like it is in the desktop.
Yep. I totally 100% on board with you. And like I said, you might be able to hide it, like know that you're on mobile and make the card hide itself, because that you can definitely do. Like with CSS will even do it for you. Like I know I'm on mobile, ergo I won't render myself. So you could do that to hide it, but I'm not quite sure how well it would behave. It would take some testing.
Yeah, we should have Viva Connection dashboard on in our mobile device so that we can test this out with all of the high value interactions we do here at Simpraxis.
Because we're all
every interaction at Simpraxis is high value.
It's like Lake Wobegon of consulting.
Exactly.
We're above average.
Pre cancellation of Garrison Keillor, of course.
Yes, of course.
All right, let's move to the next.
Let's get loopy.
So this is mine, Microsoft Loop. This slide is totally lame. Now from now on known as Slame. Okay. So Microsoft Loop was announced at Ignite, and it's going to be a much bigger thing. But right now, the only thing you can do is you can add these little components. I think of them as little widgets that do Microsoft Loop in Teams. And there's a link in the resources to tell you how to do that. But the idea is that you add this little component and you get a new little widget addy button thing. And you can choose from the list that's in the middle. And then you get something like what's on the right. That was my first Microsoft Loop thingy. So they're pretty cool because they're live typing from anywhere. So, you know, I wanted to do it live and put it in the PowerPoint, except that you can't put it in PowerPoint yet. But basically, I was on two different, like if I'm on my phone in Teams and then in my OneDrive looking at the same object and I'm typing stuff, it's all real time and you can see who's doing what. So we were talking about this as we were prepping for the session, and there's you know, there are two sort of general schools of thought here. One is this is sort of a solution looking for a problem. These little components where there's this real-time interaction, sort of like what you get when you're in a Word document or in an Excel document where people are you know, co-editing. We're working in the same document at the same time. So it's a neat little idea. You've got this component. There will be pages and then there will be workspaces, so that then you'll have this glorious bundle of these little components. And then we started to think of some use cases where it actually would work pretty well. Things like brainstorming. You know, we want to all kick around some ideas about how we're going to use Microsoft Loop. So we start adding things to a list like feed them dinner and walk the dog and cat, and we can rearrange them while we're talking and things like that. So I think there are some interesting use cases. I think this is one of those products where they're throwing it out there and the use cases may come afterwards. But I think their roadmap is relatively aggressive, given that it's the public hasn't seen these components, I don't think, before Ignite. Some of us have seen them in have they?
Well, so this was the fluid framework stuff
a
couple of So they showed that at the SharePoint conference or something a couple of years
I
ago.
couldn't remember, but
it's been 3 years since they even had the dev kitchen on it, so it's long been sitting around tech.
The tech's been sitting around, and so that to me is also sort of part of the indicator of this seems really cool, but how are people going to use it?
So I can tell you that the company my wife works for, without getting into too many details and all of that, has found a good use for similar technology in that they have a home of record for things. So imagine, like, she does financial stuff. So imagine having a place where there is a part of financial numbers, but then that component gets copied to other places. And if somebody updates the one, then it's correct all the places inside of Word docs, inside reports, that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying this would be used exactly like that, but that's the kind of thinking that I can see would make this valuable. But I agree. They kind of threw it out there, and it's going to be up to us to figure out exactly what itch that scratches.
Yep. That's about all I have to say about that. But I think if you're interested in this as a concept, watch the timeline, because I think it's going to go pretty quickly.
And we'll be experimenting with it too. Of course, your test kitchen. All right, Julie, speaking of test kitchen.
Yes, so my last one was the new profile customization with Azure Active Directory and Graph. So effectively what is happening is that you will now have the ability to display AD properties, including custom attributes 1 through 15, on the people card that shows up all over the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, right? So you'll be able to, if you go to the link that's on the last slide, you're going to see where you can do this. But effectively, you can go into the setup and you can just turn on different properties from AAD that you want to show up. And so you can kind of see from this screenshot that they pick up in these different things. And so then there also could be third-party content that shows up, and so you can see at the bottom there that's from Workday. So those can be properties that come from some third-party system, and those come through graph search connectors. So that's how that piece works. And then you do some fancy configuration in the Search Center to update the profile to say that I want these search connectors pieces to show up in the profile card. And so there's the MVP of this. So the first go at this, to get third-party data in for a connector that isn't like a one that Microsoft put out there. If you want to get first information from your third-party systems in, the early way to do that is to sync your profile data into a SQL Server. And then you use the graph connectors that are built in to say, go and get the SQL data and bring it into the search. And so that search profile, if you hit the button, Mike, there's another slide. So the search profile extension can also, this is search, obviously, this little screenshot. And so that is also being able to be extended. So the people card there, then you can do a search profile extension and say these extra pieces of information show up in search, and then they're searchable. But not all the profile properties are going to be available. The cards only work in the web apps. You can only enrich existing profile properties. So you can say, if they have like a skills property or a projects property, you can say, hey, combine data from these search connectors and put them, jam them into that field, but you can't create your own new custom one like, Simpraxis Employee of the Month thing and pull in from a third-party system. You can't do that. And your data, so in that SQL Server database, you must have the full-on blown UPN for each user. And that's how it's going to know, hey, this piece of data goes with this user. So that's important. And also, this is private preview, which means that you have to go to the link, and that link, the tech community article shows links where you can register and sign up for this private preview. And so then they'll turn the bits on in your tenant so you can start playing with it. So that was mine. Ooh, right on time. Impressive. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, we got a lot of resources, a lot of takeaways. We highly recommend the Book of News. If you haven't seen it, it's a really great summary of each day's events at Ignite. Emily, I think you were the first one to kind of point us toward this. It was awesome. Sue always does roadmap slides, so wherever there's a roadmap that's mentioned in one of the sessions for the stuff that she's interested in. Yammer, SharePoint, Viva, et cetera. You'll see them kind of aggregated there. And then we've each put in components based on the topics that we talked about today. So the Viva edition, topics, loop, the AAD, and graph. So feel free to dig in to those links. We'll post the slides as we always do. And next week, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled programming of Teams and SharePoint working together, part 3. And I think after that is the holiday special, the Island of Misfit Toys special. So we'll tease that today and talk more about it in 2 weeks. Thanks everybody for joining us. Can keep the conversation going via the chat, of course. And we look forward to talking in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.